Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Maller Grodner Attorneys, providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis. LawMG.com. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnerships with communities and organizations. rural.indiana.edu. Smithville Fiber Internet Security Solutions and Voice in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. Bunger and Robertson Attorneys at Law, utilizing 75 years of experience, knowledge, and resources to help individuals and families recover in personal injury matters. Information at lawbr.com. And by WTIU members. Thank you.
Coming up on Indiana Newsdesk. A new Indiana law requires teaching intellectual diversity in state colleges, but it doesn't explicitly define what that means. But violating the law could affect professors' tenure.
Nobody wants to be an example, but somebody will be an example.
IU's new expressive action policy went into effect this week, and students and professors tested it with the late-night vigil.
In that sense, we certainly were out there to understand what the limits were, but also how it would be enforced.
The ACLU of Indiana is suing the university, saying the policy is a violation of the First Amendment. And Bloomington's various departments present their 2025 budget proposals to the City Council. We'll have these stories, plus the latest news from across the state, right now on Indiana Newsdesk. Welcome to Indiana Newsdesk. I'm Joe Wren. Well, college students are back on campuses around the state this week, and they may notice a change in approach from some professors. That's because of a new law that went into effect this summer, Senate Enrolled Act 202. It requires intellectual diversity in the classroom. Higher education reporter Aubrey Wright has more on how colleges are adjusting.
It was just before midnight. A small group of students and faculty held a candlelight vigil into the early hours of Monday at Indiana University's Sample Gates. Professor Ben Robinson, one of the organizers, said they were mourning and protesting the loss of free speech.
And this is to mark on the very first day of school, to mark our determination that the speech that we cherish won't die on this campus.
The vigil ended peacefully. A few hours later, classes were in session. Protesters took aim at a new IU policy by gathering defiantly after an 11 p.m. cutoff for expressive activity. But the group said it had another reason to mourn: Senate Enrolled Act 202.
We want to protect IU. We want this campus to be a place where academic freedom is a real thing. A place where racial diversity and other kinds of diversity is both welcome and honored.
Governor Eric Holcomb signed SEA 202 into law last spring. It requires faculty to teach, quote, intellectually diverse ideas in the classroom. If they don't, their tenure could be in jeopardy. The law also sets up a complaint process, so faculty could be reported. Diversity, equity, and inclusion programs also must support intellectual diversity. Indiana State Senator Spencer Deary wrote the policy.
Every university is different. And so we intentionally gave some mandates, but left them a little bit open-ended to allow that flexibility.
SEA 202's language is vague. For example, it doesn't define intellectual diversity. Deary says it's supposed to strengthen debate on campus.
Some of these misconceptions out there that, oh, we need to teach the other side of this issue when the other side is clearly ridiculous. There's no mandate to do that.
Boards of trustees will decide how their schools follow the law.
The bill didn't really create any new powers the Board of Trustees didn't already have. It simply tried to give them a little bit of nudge towards the right direction.
Academics pushed hard against the legislation, saying this kind of political interference will lead to censorship and surveillance. Faculty members in this report can only speak for themselves, and they don't represent their universities.
Nobody wants to be an example, but somebody will be an example.
Masta is worried about how this law will be enforced because it could be weaponized against certain professors or topics. She and other professors are rethinking what they bring into the classroom.
I already have colleagues who are self-censoring.
According to Purdue University's interim policy, complaints about intellectual diversity are sent to HR.
I do think to some degree that's going to be a detriment to the students because, again, we're experts in our research.
Like Purdue IU is adopting an interim policy. Meanwhile, lawyers and faculty leaders are working on long-term changes. Both universities maintain they support academic freedom. IU's guidance says course content doesn't need to be changed, and faculty are still subject matter experts.
How is this going to be implemented? And we don't know yet because it has not been. It's new, it didn't take effect until July 1.
Tanford says there's no need for panic yet. Faculty reviews are already in place. The boards of trustees have always had authority over the university, and faculty are already sharing many ideas in the classroom. But Tanford says faculty don't trust their leaders. For example, at IU, they passed multiple votes of no confidence against President Pamela Whitten and staged many protests for free speech and shared governance.
But again, that's fear. It's not reality yet.
Indiana State University, one of the most diverse colleges in Indiana, is also sorting things out.
I think the hard part for us was that this bill assumed that we were already incapable of doing our work.
Eberman says Indiana State's trustees passed a policy highlighting the university's strengths, including everyone's opinion in the classroom and having evidence-based evaluations. She says lawmakers and education leaders in the state want the same thing: students succeeding and earning valuable degrees.
We just need to make sure that our legislation and our policy are in alignment with those ambitions.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Aubrey Wright.
While Sunday night's vigil at Sample Gates ended peacefully, the university is pursuing sanctions against a graduate student and professor who spoke at the vigil. Doctoral student Bryce Green and dramatic studies professor Ben Robinson are accused of violating the new expressive activity policy. Robinson says the vigil's primary focus was to make a statement about free speech at IU, but he acknowledged protesters hoped by violating the policy they could better understand it.
In that sense, we certainly were out there to understand what the limits were, but also how it would be enforced.
Green alleges the university came after him based on the content of his speech, since most of the 60 protesters weren't sanctioned. Both Green and Robinson were arrested but not charged during the pro-Palestine protest in Dunn Meadow in the spring.
In fact, they only targeted me and another professor who must have said something that they didn't like specifically. And so they're using this rule as cover to suppress the content of our speech.
The Office of Student Conduct is offering Green two options. He can either meet with the Office of Student Conduct to, quote, accept responsibility for the decisions he made and harm that was caused, or go through the student conduct process, which could lead to actions including suspension and expulsion. The ACLU of Indiana said Thursday it was suing IU over the expressive activity policy. It says the policy is overly broad and violates the First Amendment.
This is written so broadly that if any one of us was to wear a T-shirt supporting a cause at 11:15 p.m. while walking through any piece of property owned by Indiana University, we would be violating the policy.
IU has maintained it has the right to regulate the time, place, and manner of free expression on campus. The Supreme Court has upheld the right of governmental entities such as schools to impose some content-neutral restrictions. This is the third time the ACLU has sued the university since the spring protest against the war in Gaza. City of Bloomington offices and departments have been presenting their 2025 budget proposals to the Bloomington Common Council this week. Our Benta Boutier has been sitting in on the meetings and has this report.
One of the city's main goals is to increase wages for its employees by at least 3% to adjust for cost of living. That could come out of the unspent reserve revenues.
Reserves are built up year over year when the budget appropriations are not spent and revenues are higher than expected. Rising interest rates have been a growing source of city revenues for the past 3 years.
The Bloomington Police Department is asking for more than $21 million in its budget. That's a $2 million increase over last year. That money would go partly to pay increases to help with recruitment and retention of staff, which continues to be an issue.
We recently, this year, authorized a take-home car policy that allows officers to take home their squad cars. There's benefits to that program. That also gives us more people that might be off duty, but in their car, that are able to respond to things that are happening on the street.
City Council person Hopi Stossberg says the police department tried increasing salaries in previous years, but is still struggling with staffing.
It's not as quantifiable as what they're paid, and is that something that also needs to be looked at in terms of our culture of policing, in terms of our culture of Bloomington, and how Bloomington responds to police and considers public safety as a whole.
Bloomington firefighters covered under the collective bargaining agreement will receive a $15,000 increase in their base pay. The Parks Department's request of about $12 million includes about $400,000 for security, which it says is essential. The Bloomington Economic and Sustainable Development Department wants to add a capital projects manager position and is about $111,000 of the department's proposed budget. The new position would oversee projects like Hopewell, the neighborhood set for development on the old downtown hospital site. The Bloomington Housing Authority told City Council it plans to add 50 affordable units next year through development. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Ben Taboutier.
The city wrapped up its 4 days of budget hearings last night, with the Bloomington Common Council asking for an 11% increase in its budget from last year. Council President Isabel Piedmont Smith says one of their top goals is improving communication and outreach to the public and engaging with new groups. The city departments have 10 days to make any amendments to their budget request before the council votes on it. Thousands of furries descended on Indianapolis last weekend. As Ethan Sandwise reports, these fans of cartoon animals have gathered annually for 15 years, with more attending each convention.
When people think of Indianapolis, they think race cars. Furries, not so much. But this is the biggest showing ever for Indy FurCon. Over 2,000 guests turned out at the Wyndham Hotel, 15% more than last year. They attended meetups, lectures and panels, sold art, and played board games.
Furry isn't a fan of some copyrighted thing. Furry isn't a fan of somebody else's creation. Furry is a fan of itself.
The furry community comes from diverse places, but they've got one thing in common: a love of anthropomorphic cartoon animals. Think Wile E. Coyote and Zootopia.
I admit it can be a little weird at first, but I find people rolling around with Harley Davidson jackets in thousands in groups showing up in the middle of nowhere, South Dakota, kind of weird, but hey, you do you.
While Indy FurCon doesn't draw crowds like the city's tabletop gaming convention, Gen Con, this year's gathering was nearly 6 times the size of the first Indy FurCon in 2010.
For better or worse, becoming more mainstream for sure. It's becoming, we have more references in pulp culture and movies and social media and just general media as a whole, and it's becoming more well known.
Jake Bunny is a professional pilot and former race car driver. He's also a furry. That means he's adopted a furry persona, or fursona, to use online and at the con. He has been in the community since 1997 after watching the Looney Tunes comedy Space Jam. Early internet forums led him to early furry meetups, and 15 years ago he got together with his friends, including Storm Griffin, to create Indy FurCon.
You never tell a group of furries that they're not capable of rising to a challenge, and that's how this con got started.
Turns out there's a lot of people like them. Furry conventions take place around the world, and they're getting bigger. Last year's Anthrocon in Pittsburgh broke records with over 17,000 attendees. Furry is often, but not always, associated with kink. Although furry is non-sexual for many people, a survey by IU professor Justin Laymiller at the Kinsey Institute found that 9% of U.S. adults had fantasized at least once about dressing as a furry during sex. Only 1% reported experiencing the fantasy often. But daytime events stay PG. Dozens of the events are on topics that might have nothing to do with furry. In a sense, these subgroups are the convention. In contrast with other fandoms, furries use the community as a gateway to other interests, such as music, art, or even racing.
If you're looking for, fellow artists, car nerds, graphic designers, IT professionals, this fandom presents endless opportunities to uplift you and open doors for careers and friendships that will last a lifetime.
For a community that interacts mostly online, cons give them an opportunity to express themselves and make connections in a friendly environment.
I think that's a big part of the draw, is that I don't have to impress people about me. If I don't want to, I can put on this fake character or persona and go with that.
Indy FurCon ended Sunday evening. Next year's dates haven't yet been announced. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Ethan Sandweiss.
Indy FurCon's charity fundraiser raised almost $15,000 for Oinking Acres, a pig sanctuary in Brownsburg, Indiana. Coming up next on Indiana Newsdesk. Officials are urging people to get the latest COVID vaccine as cases are on the rise across much of the country. And
hi, I'm Katie Spack. I'm here at Memorial Stadium today to check out all the new dining options coming this football season.
These stories and more right here on Indiana Newsdesk.
No world is truly unchanging.
This is nature at its absolute finest.
Our daughter, she's gone missing. I should leave this alone.
But you won't.
He's doing things no one had ever done before, and that is astounding.
It's absolutely mind-boggling.
This is a matter of life and death.
Oh, good. Tell us everything.
Something's not right.
Could be worse.
These two crimes are connected.
That's changed everything.
Wrapped your eyes in murder again.
Needle in a haystack, right? I trust my instincts.
I should leave this alone.
But you won't.
Welcome back to Indiana Newsdesk. We're joined now by Clayton Baumgarth for the latest headlines from around the state.
Awesome. With COVID once again surging across the country, experts are urging people to get the newest vaccine, which the U.S. Food and Drug Administration approved just last week. And while there is a lack in reporting new cases, Bloomington's wastewater scan dashboard shows a large increase in COVID-19 particles. Recent numbers have been their highest in 2 years. But because there is so little reporting of cases, experts say too few are taking precautions.
We're just wishing it away. We're not thinking about it. A lot of people maybe get symptoms, don't even get tested. And so I think a lot of it's just fatigue, just lack of care or empathy.
The CDC's latest COVID guidelines say to isolate for 24 hours. Then, if you don't have a fever, you can return to normal activities, but wear a mask for 5 days in public.
Very few people are even doing that. But we also know that when you get COVID-19, you're infectious for several days, not just 24 hours.
The IU Student Health Center and the CVS pharmacy locations in Bloomington say they should receive the newest version of the vaccine within a week. The Monroe County Council is advertising a local income tax increase to help pay for the new county jail. In a 6-to-1 vote, the council decided to reduce the special lit rate to 0.03% and increase the correctional rate to 2.2%. That revenue will be used for construction of the new facility.
Folks need to come in and be able to say what they want to say and say what they need to say to us because this is their money. I will vote in favor of this because I want to hear from public personally.
The rate changes will go through a public comment period and receive a final vote before becoming official. The county is required to build a new jail under a 2009 settlement agreement with the ACLU, which sued over overcrowded conditions. Where it will be built is still up for discussion. Nashville is looking for a new police chief after the town council voted unanimously to remove Heather Burris from her role. Sergeant Daniel Scott Bowling will serve as interim police chief. The council started an investigation into Burris' performance had been ongoing but did not share specifics. A letter sent to Burris cited a lack of overall police presence during busy tourist hours and Burris living 68 miles from Nashville. Residents came forward to share their support of Burris, who had been with the department for 2 years. Bloomington's oldest pizza restaurant closed its doors this week. Cafe Pizzeria owner Crosby Webb announced he was retiring to focus on family. An announcement posted to the restaurant's website and on the storefront thanked employees and local customers. It was signed by the Webb family, which has owned the restaurant since 1986. Cafe Pizzeria opened in 1953. Some Terre Haute residents have until next week to express interest in connecting to the city's water utility. The city has heard from about a third of its Terratown neighborhood residents, but needs more feedback to decide whether a project to add more customers to the system can move forward.
Indiana American Water is our largest utility provider in the area, and then we do have some individuals still on well water.
The Terratown Connect project connects homes from private wells to the Indiana American Water public utility system at no upfront connections cost. The city secured $2 million in American Rescue Plan Act funds to cover connection fees. Indiana American Water would invest up to $6 million in the project if enough neighborhood residents participate. The city says connecting to the service could lower homeowner insurance rates with installation of new fire hydrants and increase property values with access to high-quality public water. And finally, more than 3 decades ago, the first Batman movie laid the groundwork for superhero films to follow. Sophie Kelbley has more on Batman's rise to box office stardom and Indiana University's connection to the franchise.
The Batman feature film debuted 35 years ago, and the blockbuster wouldn't exist without an IU graduate who's a self-described comic book geek.
I got to know by the age of 13, 14, the creators of Batman. And they told me directly how Batman was created, why Batman was created, what the original vision was.
But Uslan says Batman's TV debut in the 1960s was campy and not like the comics. Uslan wanted a more serious take on Batman, so he bought the rights in 1979, but 10 years of barriers stood between him and the release of the feature film.
I was shocked to my toes when I was turned down by every single studio in Hollywood. They told me I was crazy, that it was the worst idea they ever heard.
Ultimately, the film broke multiple box office records, and Uslan says recent superhero films owe it a lot. He credits director Tim Burton's focus on the human aspect of Batman and says that choice still shapes movies today. And Uslan says none of this would have happened without IU. The experimental curriculum program let him teach a comic book class.
And that led to 2 incredible phone calls, one from Stan Lee from Marvel Comics and one from the president of DC Comics, who offered me a job.
Uslan pays it back by teaching courses at the media school yearly and by donating comics and memorabilia to the Lilly Library. IU Cinema will screen the 1989 film August 30th and hold a Q&A with Uslan after. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Sophie Kelbley.
Wow, cool stuff.
Yeah.
Now, do you have a favorite Batman actor?
Oof, I'm partial to Christian Bale.
Oh.
I love him in Dark Knight. It's amazing.
Classic. I got to go with Adam West, the original. It's late 60s.
That's a good call. That's a good call.
Thanks, Clayton. A new football season kicks off Saturday at Memorial Stadium, and with it comes some tasty upgrades at the concession stands. Katie Spack has the scoop on what fans can expect.
It's a fresh season for Indiana football. That includes a new selection of stadium snacks. Levy Restaurants began working with IU Athletics in April. The company is known for its sports venue catering, and it's cooked up some new food selections for IU's game days. Among the new items are potato chip nachos and Hoosier hot dogs. Levy is also partnering with 6 local restaurants to bring their food to the stadium. Fans will be able to get favorites from Avers Pizza, Baked of Bloomington, Buffalo's, Everbowl, Social Cantina, and Yogi's at this season's games.
It was really important to us in our partnership to also introduce partners in restaurants that are locally known, places that students recognize, that the fans recognize, who have wonderful food and want to be here in the stadium.
Buffalo's assistant general manager Kyle Sun says the restaurant is introducing some stadium-exclusive menu items, including a giant pork tenderloin sandwich and a Chicago authentic Italian beef. There's also a new Red Zone wing sauce.
It's kind of like this hot garlic buffalo sauce. It's really tasty, not too spicy, but yet then again, enough to, make your mouth say hello.
Bloomington Everbowl co-owner Mike Fowler is bringing the store's most popular bowls to the north end of the concourse.
Partnering with IU is incredible, and we've only been open since October of last year, so we've got a great following with the student body already, and be able to bring this to them here at the stadium is even better.
There are also 6 new grab-and-go shops with self-checkouts for things like popcorn or beer. Cox from Levy Restaurants says fans will see similar dining changes coming to Simon Scott Assembly Hall during basketball season. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Katie Spack.
There'll be a fresh look on the football field, too. The Kurt Signetti era begins Saturday. The former James Madison coach was hired to turn around a program that has won just 3 Big Ten games in the last 3 years. Signetti revamped the roster through the transfer portal.
You got to change the way people think, the mindset, the culture, the identity of your football team. And I think we've made progress, but you really can't measure it till you play.
While Cignetti hasn't officially named a starter, all signs point to Curtis Work. The 6'5" transfer from Ohio was the Mid-American Conference Offensive Player of the Year as a junior in 2022. In 33 career starts for the Bobcats, Work threw for over 7,500 yards and 50 touchdowns.
He's not a real rah-rah guy on the field, which is fine. You know, you lead kind of by example and how you do on the field, but he's got the respect of all his teammates.
Saturday's game against Florida International kicks off at 3:30 p.m. on the Big Ten Network. Well, that's the end of this program, but our work continues online as we cover the news throughout the week at WTIUnews.org. Have a great weekend.
Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Maller-Grodner Attorneys, providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis. LawMG.com. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnerships with communities and organizations. rural.indiana.edu. Smithville Fiber Internet Security Solutions and Voice in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. Bunger and Robertson Attorneys at Law, utilizing 75 years of experience, knowledge, and resources to help individuals and families recover in personal injury matters. Information at lawbr.com. And by WTIU members. Thank you.